You know, when you look up and see the International Space Station streaking across the night sky, it's easy to think of it as this amazing symbol of science and peaceful cooperation. But what if I told you that the whole idea of a space station was actually born from a secret military pact, a terrifying high-altitude race, and, yeah, the threat of global annihilation? Let's dig into the hidden story of how we first got into space.
Right. The story we all know is about peaceful astronauts and incredible experiments. But was that the original plan? Was the whole concept of a permanent base in the sky really about controlling the ultimate high ground? Well, to find the real answer, we have to travel back in time, not to the space race, but to the ashes of World War I.
So our story really kicks off in the 1930s with this brilliant scientist, Auguste Piccard. He was absolutely obsessed with studying the upper atmosphere, but he had a problem. No university, no scientific society would give him a dime for his project. Meanwhile, a defeated Germany was secretly rebuilding its military, desperate to get around the strict rules of the Treaty of Versailles. And that's where these two very different worlds were about to collide.
What happened next was this really strange, secret partnership. I mean, think about it. On one side, you have Piccard, who just wants pure scientific knowledge about cosmic rays in the atmosphere. And on the other, you have the secret German Air Force, basically the early version of the Luftwaffe, and they wanted a military edge. They desperately needed to know how their planes would perform way up high and how their pilots could survive up there. Piccard could get them that data, and they had the cash he needed. So a deal was struck.
When you lay it out like this, the chain of events is just remarkable. The total humiliation of Germany after World War I directly sparks this secret plan to rearm. At the exact same time, Piccard's scientific dream is hitting a brick wall because he's broke. It's this bizarre twist of fate where a military's thirst for revenge ends up funding the very first human mission to the edge of space.
So, on May 27, 1931, Piccard and his assistant climb into this pressurized aluminum sphere, seal the hatch, and launch. But what was supposed to be a pretty straightforward science mission, well, it turned into an absolute nightmare, a desperate fight just to stay alive.
Can you even imagine the terror? You're 15 kilometers up, higher than any human has ever been, and you hear the hiss of your oxygen leaking out. Then you realize the valve to let you down is frozen solid at minus 60 degrees. They were trapped. For 17 hours, they just drifted, and everyone on the ground thought they were dead. But in this incredible show of quick thinking, they literally plugged the leak with cotton and Vaseline and used reflectors to focus sunlight onto the frozen valve, eventually thawing it just enough to descend. Unbelievable!
So Piccard doesn't just survive, he comes back with a treasure trove of invaluable data for the German military. But here's the thing, the whole world was watching. His success didn't just help Germany, it lit a fire under the Soviet Union and America, kicking off this frantic and frankly deadly race for the heavens.
And the Soviets were fast. Just 3 years later, they launched their own mission. And they didn't just beat Piccard's record, they absolutely shattered it, soaring to an incredible 22 kilometers. It was a huge propaganda win for the USSR.
But that record-breaking flight, it wasn't a triumph. It was a national tragedy, one that the Soviet Union tried its absolute best to cover up and hide from the world.
So here's what went wrong. In their race to get the record, they just went too high. In the super-thin upper atmosphere, their balloon expanded way more than they expected, creating all these tiny, invisible tears in the fabric. As they started to come down into denser air, the balloon compressed, but now gas was leaking out of all those tears. They lost buoyancy, and the capsule just plummeted out of the sky like a rock. All 3 crew members were killed on impact. Okay, so let's fast forward past World War II. This high-altitude competition goes to a whole new level. The battlefield shifts from the stratosphere right into orbit, and the Cold War space race begins. Now, the stakes aren't just about setting records, they're about literal national survival.
In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik 1, and that tiny little satellite just beeping as it orbited the Earth created absolute panic in America. The thinking was simple and terrifying. If the Soviets could put a satellite over the US, they could put a bomb over the US. The fear was so real that it directly led to the creation of NASA just 1 year later.
And with all this fear in the air, American military thinkers started cooking up some truly terrifying new weapon ideas. One of the most chilling was this concept called kinetic bombardment, the idea of turning gravity itself into a weapon, attacking not with an explosion, but with pure, unstoppable force dropped from the sky.
The most well-known of these ideas was called Project Thor, though it got the nickname Rods from God. The plan was horrifyingly simple. Take a massive rod made of tungsten, about the size of a telephone pole, stick it in orbit, and then just let it go. No explosives, no warhead, just the unbelievable destructive energy of a huge object hitting the Earth at thousands of miles an hour.
And the power, it's just staggering to think about. The energy from a single one of these rods hitting the ground would be like a small tactical nuclear weapon. It could punch through hundreds of feet of concrete to destroy any bunker. And here's the kicker. Because there's no nuclear material, there's no radioactive fallout, it was the ultimate clean superweapon, a concept that would completely shatter the idea of space as a peaceful domain.
So while the US was busy building spy satellites and dreaming up concepts like Project Thor, the Soviet Union was getting ready to respond. And their answer to this threat from above was going to be way more direct and a whole lot more real than anything the Americans had on the drawing board.
See, the Soviets figured out that a satellite just wasn't enough. It flies over, snaps a few pictures, and then it's gone. To really counter the American threat, they decided they needed a permanent presence, a watchtower in the sky, an orbital fortress where they could not only watch everything, but also, if needed, fight back.
So the Soviets didn't just sit around theorizing. They built something. They launched the world's first military space station, called Salyut 3. And then, in a move that sounds like it's straight out of a James Bond movie, they armed it with a cannon, a real working cannon in orbit around the Earth.
The difference in their approaches is it's black and white. While America was designing these theoretical superweapons like Project Thor, the Soviet Union actually put a real offensive weapon into orbit. They took a rapid-fire cannon from one of their aircraft, modified it to work in a vacuum, and bolted it onto their Salyut 3 station. They even test-fired it in space, proving that a space station could absolutely destroy a target satellite.
So when you step back and look at all the evidence, the conclusion is pretty hard to ignore. The story we're usually told, that pure scientific curiosity was the main reason for space exploration. Well, at least in the beginning, it seems like that was mostly a cover story. The real, primary motivation for humanity's first permanent homes in space? It was all about gaining military dominance.
So okay, that's the secret history, and now we know it. But it just begs the question, doesn't it? Have things really changed that much? Or have the military uses for a space station just gotten way more advanced and a lot less obvious than a giant cannon bolted to the side? The potential space weapons of today are way more subtle than a cannon. Military strategists think about these scenarios. Imagine an EMP generator in orbit that could shut down the electronics of an entire continent, or using weather modification as a weapon. A space station could even be the perfect isolated lab to develop bioweapons, far away from any prying eyes. These are the kinds of strategic worries that echo the fears of the Cold War.
And that really brings us to our final thought here. For over half a century now, humans have had a continuous presence in orbit. We're told they're up there studying microgravity and figuring out how to grow vegetables in space, and that's valuable science, no doubt about it. But given the very clear military history that kicked this whole thing off, you have to ask yourself, is that really all they're doing up there?